Welcome to the Swishers podcast on personality typing. Most people know of Myers-Briggs. There are others available. To start with, I'm just going to go straight over to Richard. We've actually got Richard Norcross and Ciaran Crossan with myself, Bill Young, today. And I'm going to invite Richard to kick off the conversation on personality typing.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Bill. I think that most people first exposure to personality types was maybe Myers-Briggs. It was one of the very first commercially available ones, probably 30 years ago, 40 years ago even. And there are many different tools available on the market. I've always been a big fan of them, probably because I ran my own business for a few years principally with one of the tools, Insights Discovery in this case, using it as the main driver for what I was doing in terms of team development, talent management. And I find them to be a very useful tool. It's not the answer to everything, but I think they are, when they're used well and when they're used correctly in the right situations for individuals or groups, they can be a very powerful tool.
Super. Ciaran, you once told me you'd done Myers-Briggs many times.
I've been through Myers-Briggs. I think probably about 10 times I've had it done to me. I've tended to encounter them in recruitment events where I've been trying to get a job. So you get a personality type test. And then what sometimes also happens is when you get a change of management, they sometimes like to do the Myers-Briggs testing as, I guess, some form of new engagement with their team. Just out of interest, so that I know whom I'm speaking to, what are your... I am INTP.
I'm INTP. We can't both be INTP.
Well, I think we can.
But it's supposed to be rare. I always prided myself on being O negative and INTP as universal donors.
Many, many years ago, I did Myers-Briggs, and then I was an ENTJ, I think. Probably if I did it now, it would have changed quite a bit, being that must be 30 years or more that's elapsed since I did it. And this is one of the pieces that always, I suppose, frustrated me a little bit. When I was first exposed to it, it was, at least for me, quite revolutionary at the time. And everybody went around comparing, what are you, an ISTP or an ENTJ? And that was fine. But I think, to me, that the limit of the tool at that point, it gave you what you were, what your personality type was. And I always, since then, and knowing what I know now about personality types and tools, I always wanted to ask the question, and now what? What do I do with that information? It's nice to know where I am. So what? Always left that question with me. So what?
What was your conclusion? I got some thoughts on that, Richard, but I'd like to hear what your answer to so what was.
It almost put a label on you and say, that's what you are. You're more, extrovert than introvert. And that was, it was interesting to know. But of course, if you do a tool like that in the workplace, and we did it on a team development course, an individual development course as well. You want to know, well, how can I use that to do what I do at work more effectively, more efficiently, or whatever? And for me, the question of so what was never fully answered, at least when I did Myers-Briggs. It never, maybe it's developed and evolved since then, but it never answered the question of, and this is what you can do with that in the workplace. It was almost like I likened it to when I was doing applied maths at A level at school, which I guess I failed miserably, much to my father's annoyance, because I never understood the application of what I was learning in the classroom to the real world. And that, for me, was what was missing with the first exposure to Myers-Briggs.
Right. I think it's very interesting that you say so what, because I had the similar experience. And the first time my answer to so what, was, that's who I am. It's like a label. I could put it up here. In the workshop that we were doing, it was almost as if everyone wanted to have a little label saying, I'm INTP. And so what? So what? I can manipulate other people because I know what they are and know how they're going to react. Or so what? I should put this on my desk or on a badge. Or so what? Now I know how to develop myself. And it's this final one that struck me as being really important. Just happened to be INTP. And it seemed that actually I lived in a world of extroverts. I need to learn to deal with this. And so that led me down that route. I found that really useful. Ciaran, what was your...
I've asked the so what question as well. What does that mean? I mean, I'd read somewhere that your personality, the sort of the inner wirings of your personality is kind of fixed at a very, very young age. You cannot change that. It can't be changed. But what you can change is how you behave. towards your external environment. For me, the answer that I got to the so what question was, well, this tells us your preferences for communication outwards and inwards. And if you know what other people's preferences are for communication outwards and inwards, you can communicate with them better. One thing that I've always been scared of with Myers-Briggs is, now I know that certain occupations or certain types of professionals and certain occupations will cluster around particular personality types. I think the introverted scientist or the introverted engineer is not an unknown personality type. Of course, nor is the extroverted engineer or the extroverted scientist. But I think there's certain clusters. What would worry me is a manager attempting to construct an organization around a particular set of personality skills. Some professions cluster around certain personality types, and I think that's fair because the granularity of the model only has 16 boxes to put people into. But one of the things that's kind of troubled me where a manager attempts to design an organization around a particular set of personality types. And I think that is very dangerous. I think something like that is kind of doomed to fail. The other part that sometimes troubles me about MBTI is it doesn't provide us with a sufficient indication of how that person is going to behave in terms of their individual behavior when they're in the workplace. I think there's other personality tests that should probably be used. Without making a joke about it, I mean, I think I would be an advocate of putting people through the HER psychopathy checklist. I've seen toxic individuals that are INTP, ENTS, whatever. I've seen, it won't give you an indication as to the potential toxicity of a person's behavior.
That's true. Yeah. I do think there's other tests which are not personality types, but they're psychopathy tests. But I wanted to come back to you on this 16 types because my objection is not so much that people recruit to a type, but this classification into 16 seems to ignore people's lived experiences. Whilst I agree strongly with the idea that people have a basic personality type that is acquired early in life, an awful lot of learned experiences are actually about dealing with that in society. So you've got firstly a family and then a schoolroom and then a workplace where you have to interact with other people. And you tend to learn how your personality works with other people and adjust it accordingly. And all of that is missing. Sorry, not all of it, but a lot of that is missing from the way in which these personality tests are used. Now, an experienced practitioner of e.g. Myers-Briggs would say, no, you go to level 2. And that is all taken into account. I don't see too many people actually proficient enough to go to level 2. I see it as being people like me, have learned it in an amateurish way, say, I'm INTP. You just got to learn to live with that. And I don't like that.
I think it's the danger of getting too deep into any of the psychometric tools out there is that there are very few trained psychologists and psychiatrists who exist within the normal corporate workplace. I mean, sometimes organizations will recruit them in, obviously, but that's usually to deal with a specific, a recruitment, it could be, or a team development or so on. And and I don't think there's really a need to go into that much depth. I mean, I found the tools incredibly useful in a team environment. I think it can help to give people a feel of where they exist on a wheel, for example. I use the Insights Discovery Wheel as an example because I know the tool very well. All of the psychometric tools essentially use the same introversion, extroversion, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving scales, or continuums is probably a better word. They're all based off Jung's work. I think that in a team environment, it can be interesting that sometimes you have a conflict between two people and you see them on a chart and you got them very opposite sides of the circle. And there's that aha moment when people see perhaps why they do have some conflict with an individual or individuals. But I think that the most useful method or the most useful piece of the tool goes down into individual development. It can be quite an eye-opener for people when they first read about themselves and understand how very accurate the tools are. Once you have this tool as a way of, I call it looking in the mirror, then that could be incredibly helpful to an individual in the workplace to understand how they may be perceived by others in terms of their, I don't know, communication style, their behaviours or whatever.
If you go to Devil 2, and I haven't, but I have talked to a lot of people who have, they do have shades according to how extroverted you are or how introverted you are. Admittedly, it's still based on the four dipoles, giving 4 times 4 is 16. But there are shades within that. And obviously they don't show up psychopathy and those sort of things. But I think people do take it to a different level. We can't dismiss it by saying it's not subtle.
I mean, I once had a conversation with a lady from HR, and this was a driven conversation around sort of MBTI. These were individual conversations that were done in the team. I wasn't sort of specifically zeroed out or singled out for this. And I'll be honest, it was probably one of the least comfortable conversations I've ever had, in that this lady from Human Resources basically diagnosed for me various mental health issues that I might have later in life. I can see you shaking your head, Richard. It's, yes.
This is a dangerous lady.
Yeah, this is a dangerous lady. And I basically left that conversation knowing that I was the sane one. And this person, I think, was of very questionable benefit to the company. I also once had an encounter, as you said, it was during a recruitment interview. I'll not name the organization, but they had brought in a psychologist to administer the psychometric tests for the people at the second interview. This guy was, I don't know how you would describe it. He struck me as a bit of a blowhard. Had a lot to say about himself and not a lot to say about other people. Again, I had to sit through this interview, and this was the point where I decided, no, actually, I don't really want this job, and now I need to throw the interview.
It's fascinating, isn't it, that sometimes the power of the information in a human resources professional, of which I happen to be one, can be very useful and also very, very dangerous. I mean, Ciaran's unpleasant experience of somebody, diagnosing him as mentally ill. I use that as a throwaway comment, but being left to feel somewhat inadequate after having feedback session is just completely counterproductive and not how these tools should be used at all, especially in the hands of what sounds like a very untrained professional, certainly not licensed to delve down into the psyche of anybody. I've always said this, they are one of many tools that can be used to help develop individuals. Coaching is another one. Making presentations, having group discussions, all of these are developmental interventions. So the psychometric tool of any type should not be seen as the be-all and end-all. It's just that. It is a tool that can help an individual reflect on, identify some blind spots, for example, things that people weren't aware of that could be very helpful in terms of improving their own development.
I'm on that page, Richard, because as I said earlier, I do see all of these tools as being very useful to helping one understand oneself and understanding why you have certain instincts, behaviors, speech patterns, and what your relationship with others is. I think they get dangerous, however, when people are tempted to categorize themselves. I'm going to say something that some people may even react to or find offensive, but I don't like this tendency these days to talk about a spectrum of autism, because to me there is a very natural spectrum of autistic characteristics that are within the normal range. And I'm often accused of being slightly Asperger's or whatever, and people half joking about it. But the temptation to say, that's my excuse for the way I behave. I've come across people in meetings online, people I didn't know, who said, of course, I'm autistic, therefore I do this and I do that, as if it's an excuse for not managing their own behavior. Now, that's the end of the stuff that might be slightly offensive. I think on a lower level, there is a great temptation with these personality typings to say, that is who I am. I have an excuse to behave like this, and I don't have to do it any other way. I find that lazy and insulting to others. And I think that is a misuse of Myers-Briggs and other personality types that people slip into very quickly after learning their personality type.
That is an extreme abuse of the process, in my opinion. It's a diabolical liberty, as some people around London might say. No one is in control of their personality. And this is my view, my personal view. No one is in control of their personality. That also includes where they might sit on a continuum of ADHD or Asperger's. Or you can't control your personality, but what you can control is your behavior. If someone says that to me, well, this is who I am and you have to accept it, then the conclusion I make from that is, well, if you can't control your behavior, you're probably not going to be of much benefit to the organization.
The personality types that exist are, I think it's useful to be aware of them. I think it's useful to understand what your personality type is and therefore how you might be perceived to behave in a workplace or even at home. And one of the things I've always said to people is when they get their their personality profile is share it with people that really care for them or that they really care for, usually close family members, because that can be very insightful, especially when it comes to the point that Ciaran was making earlier on about people, or you, Bill, finding excuses to say, well, that's just the way that I am. And I often say to people when I see them behaving in a way in a meeting or in a discussion that I don't agree with, that I think is maybe bordering on unprofessional, I will always say to them, Can you hear what you're saying? Do you actually see this when you come across to people in this particular way? And then it's very useful to have these tools available so they can see what their personality is, how they may behave as a result of that. And then I think you're right. You can't necessarily change a person's personality, but you can certainly change their behavior. And the first step to that is always making them aware of how they behave, and the downsides of that sometimes.
I absolutely get that.
Absolutely. But what you've described, Richard, is what the diagnosis is actually for these various neurodiverse conditions, in that the diagnosis is there so that you have it and then you can deal with it that the person can reach their potential. It's not an excuse.
Absolutely. I completely agree. It's to use it as an excuse, for example, if somebody, oh, well, I'm an alpha male, I'm an egocentric narcissist, and that's why I am the way I am. I think that's just awful. To say that in an individual or a group situation, it's just, and then I would say, can you hear what you're actually saying? That you're saying it's okay to behave like that, even though it's not going to get the best out of your work colleagues, your team, if God forbid they actually lead a team, and therefore is detrimental to the organisation.
The first time I began to think about these things was the first time we did a Myers-Briggs workshop. We were separated into groups. We were all told that we had a day that appeared in our calendars that wasn't there before. There was no meetings, nothing scheduled. What were we going to do? And our group was going to tidy the garage, clean up the rest of our calendar. It was going to go through the filing system, sort out my model train set and make sure that everything was properly catalogued so that the next day everything in the world would look fine and dandy. And the other group, they were going to go to Disneyland or they were going to take a flying lesson. And all they'd done was to take the E's and the I's, the extroverts and the introverts, and put them in separate groups. And this was such an eye-opener because I fitted so naturally into these people who were going to clear the garage. And I did not see myself there at all. But that was the beginning of a track for me in terms of, oh my God, who am I and why am I behaving like this? No one else has that experience.
No, I've not had that experience. Although I do think, tidying the garage would be my preference as well. As much as I might be excited by Disneyland, the logical part of me says I would not be able to get there, have fun, and get back in the same day.
Yeah, my family, my son and my wife visited Las Vegas. I said, no, I don't know. I think I'll give that one a miss. I got a text message back when they got there. All it said was, you would hate it.
An extrovert can see an introvert as too slow or plodding. Those extroverts need those introverts there because those are the ones that bring the detail, the rigor, and the analysis to a particular work challenge. And although it may be to an extrovert great to have lots of fun and go to Disneyland, sometimes you do need to have somebody who is very capable of cleaning out the garage now and again.
I'll tell you a story not quite relevant to what we've said so far, but my eldest son did go on an MBTI trainer's course. So there were people who knew a little bit about it. During a break, the trainer went out of the room. My son, who's quite an extrovert, walked up the front, stood at the desk or the lectern or whatever, and started describing the Star Wars characters and allocating them to MBTI types. This was the first time they'd heard this sort of classification of literary characters in MBTI types. And they were laughing and hooting. And then he heard the trainer coming back, and he decided he'd better get off the lectern and walk back. But he stopped and he said, and it gets better. You can do the same for Downton Abbey. He realized that if you're an author or artist, a writer, that actually these personality types are obvious to you, and you create your book or your play or your film around these personality types, and you can spot them in Lord of the Rings, in Harry Potter, in all of them. And usually every MBTI type is characterized there.
Just to build on your point, the best movies, the movies that you enjoy the most, is not necessarily the storyline. That's the best movies, best books that people enjoy the most. It's not necessarily the storyline, but it's the development of the characters as they pass through the storyline. And all classic literature is based around that.
I'm still trying to work out Darth Vader's Myers-Briggs type. Actually,
just Google it. Just Google Darth Vader MBTI, and it'll give it to you.
The challenge with that, the Star Wars analogy, is that you always end up with somebody in the room who's never seen Star Wars, so that can always be a bit of a challenge. In the workplace, in the work environment, understanding what everybody's particular type, what everybody's particular color energy is very helpful, because there can be the situation when, and particularly with those who may be more extrovert and red-coloured, red-yellow, really sort of focus on driving an agenda, don't care about the harmony in the team, don't care about the details of what they have to do. They just want to get stuff done and hopefully have some fun while they're doing it as well. And one of the best ways I've seen of somebody stopping that behaviour and pulling an individual back from charging off down the road without really thinking too much is when they pick up a particular detail in a project or whatever that nobody has thought about before. And I think that's when the respect for that individual or that particular behavior or personality type can be very powerful. And there's a little saying, and I don't know where it comes from, is seek respect, not attention. It lasts longer. So those who seek attention tend to be the extroverts. But at the same time, you can have somebody who's an introvert and they pick up on something and they gain a huge amount of respect. And that's why you need teams who are a real mixture of all of the different types and behaviours.
I'm picking up a feeling from this that it is extremely useful to, especially people like you, Richard, who use it professionally, also to the rest of us to help us develop ourselves. But that there is a range of uses. At the very low end, there's people who just take it very amateurishly or very lightly, dip into it, abuse it slightly, get a bit of a kick out of classifying people, and that's it. It's flippant. At the other extreme, there are people who take it possibly too seriously and get locked into the methodologies and the analyses, and it all gets a bit too serious. Whereas in the middle, there is a really useful bit where people get an insight into their personality and their relationship with others and can use it. But it does seem to me to take a little bit of time and effort to get to that point, to be able to use it realistically. And there is often a lot of criticism of MBTI from people who think that it should have some scientific or neurological basis. And I'm quite sure that it doesn't. I'm pretty sure that when Jung developed the concept of personality types, it was entirely observational. It was, I see these characteristics in people. I don't have to relate this to what their brain is actually doing. Therefore, when he developed, and others following him, developed a set of tests which classified you into different types, it was not saying the brain is divided into 9 or 16 or whatever different segments, and you're this one and you're that one. It wasn't saying anything neurological. It was saying, here are some ways in which people behave, entirely observational. Therefore, there is no scientific criticism of it that is valid because it is so observational. It is not analytical in terms of, I don't have to say that my hypothalamus is operating this way and yours isn't, if you're with me. Does that make sense? That's the criticism I hear people say there's no scientific basis. There isn't. It's entirely observational.
I said at the start, Bill, that one of the piece about these psychometric tools is they are just that. They're a tool to be used, one tool to be used in many other interventions in which you can help people and teams look in the mirror and decide how they can best develop. And I mean, it really is. These tools, remember, are all about how people perceive the world, and it helps to understand. Sorry, helps individuals to understand what their preferences are and therefore how they can improve potentially communication, personal relationships, and so on. There is a huge amount of research that supports MBTI. It's one of the tools that's been around the longest, and it's very well recognized and very well established. So I think it's a one tool in many ways of improving behaviors at work you can use.
Yeah, no, I think it's well proven. The word I was looking for earlier was empirical. It's from the outside in. You look at the way people behave. You don't look inside their heads and decide they're going to be something else. Anyway, it's time that we wound down.
I remember reading somewhere about a university professor had told his class that he had done in-depth psychological evaluations of each participant in the class, and he handed them all a sealed envelope and said, your confidential personality evaluation is in there. Go away and read it. Come back and tell me if you agree with it. The class went and did that, and they all came back to, each and every individual came back and said, yep, I completely agree with it. He then said, okay, well, can you swap your evaluation with the person standing beside you? They swapped the evaluations and then said, now, can the person standing beside you read your evaluation? And it turned out he'd handed each and every one of them exactly the same evaluation.
I think I got there before you, but carry on.
Which in some ways is kind of it's a counterfactual, I guess, a rather nasty trick that is often used to demonstrate that these sorts of personality tests are little more than pop psychology. I think you could probably do that with any personality test, just depending on how it's written.
Yeah, probably could. Richard?
I think I've said it before, so I'll say it again. These are great tools. They are well underpinned by years and years of research and evidence. And usage. They can be really good and effective at helping an individual improve in terms of their own personal development, particularly at work, and really helpful for teams to understand some of the team dynamics that may have caused them problems, opening their eyes to the fact that there are many different types of personality and therefore many different types of behaviors, and understanding it is the first step on the journey to helping that team be a high-performing team.
So I think that captures exactly where I've got to now. When you say the main use, you might have implied the only use, is helping the individual to develop, to understand themselves better, to understand why they relate to others. I think helping the individual to develop is what it's good at. Categorizing and classifying other people, worse still, manipulating them. That's worse than COD psychology. It becomes a little abusive. But helping the individual to develop themselves seems to me to be a really useful and powerful thing that personality typing is good at.
I agree. I think that being able to hold up a mirror to an individual is really, really helpful in terms of their own development. But also, once somebody understands how somebody and maybe why somebody reacts and behaves in a particular way, you can also give them the tools to be able to deal with that individual, and that's really helpful.
Good. Well, I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much indeed, Richard Norcross. Ciaran Crossan, who joined me today, Bill Young, to talk about personality typing on the Swish Shoes podcast. I'm looking forward to the next topic, and I don't know what it'll be yet. Thanks all.